Good day everyone, the Anime Now is back with another video. Today we'll be looking at some Chinese series from a few years ago that were mainly animated by Japanese studios. These series did not receive a great reception back then. Most of these series were Sino-Japanese co-productions, and most likely due to miscommunication, they often had many issues in the production, but obviously there were other factors too. In general, these series did not leave a great first impression for Chinese series in the heads of many anime fans when they saw them released in Crunchyroll alongside their other seasonal offerings. These co-productions projects mostly ended in failure. A consequence of their failure was that companies in China had an even greater motive to shift to domestic productions aside from governmental incentives. However, were these series really that bad? That is what we will be exploring in this video. Before we start, however, consider clicking that red button with the word subscribe on it, and the one with the thumbs up as well. It does not take too long, but it does really help us out. The first series we'll be looking at is The Outcast. This series is actually based on one of the biggest manhwa series from Tencent Comics. The series blends wuxia, martial arts, and Chinese folklore into an urban setting. What was rising in popularity in China at the same time as Outcast was Japanese anime, and it was a natural decision for business to push an animation project for it. Up to this point, everything goes quite well. The Outcast was not the first animation project by Tencent Comics. They had previously produced other shows from manhwa, but these were published in their platform and they were mostly animated domestically. For The Outcast, possibly because it was a bigger title, they decided to partner up with Howliners and Japanese producers. This was likely also because The Outcast is quite influenced by manga. Tencent Comics, alongside Howliners and their Japanese subsidiary, Emon, sell an anime that would be to the standard of one of the most popular webcomics in China. However, what they ended up with was quite underwhelming, to say the least. Namu Animation was the studio chosen to animate it. Alongside it had the assistant from the newly established Emon Studio. Both studios were relatively new, and the staff working on them was also unimpressive at best. In general, it seems the animation was mostly handled by the Japanese side, as they made up by far most of the key animation staff. Only that director was Chinese, like in most co-productions, but that position was always accompanied by an assistant director. The one directing the series was Xin Wang, a reasonably experienced director from China that had previously directed Dian Now, but one that was mostly animated domestically. So what was the end result of all that poor production? The end result was a badly animated series with bad pacing. To the surprise of the producers most likely, its reception was likely mild to say the least. In the West, Crunchyroll released it and they received more attention than some other co-productions, but it was not rated that highly. However, Tencent was not willing to give up on it. And they received a second, third and fourth season so far, but these have not been transnational productions anymore. They have been solely Chinese domestic productions. The next series we'll be looking at is called Once Upon a Time There Was a Spirit Mountain. This was a project driven in the Chinese side by Tencent Comics as well as the producer, and in the Japanese as the animation production through Studio Dean. Pretty much all the key positions in the animation part were Japanese. Li Hao-ling stands out in the director role, but it is a role he shared with Suzuki Iku. So I assume he was probably an in-between link from the producers back in China to the animation's producers in Japan. Li Hao-ling is also the CEO of Howliners, that was one of the producers of the series. This was probably a learning experience for him, and he'll probably take that back and use it to develop his own studio. I always felt this was a peculiar series to adapt into an animation which would appeal to foreign audiences through the channels established for Japanese animation. In part, this was mainly because of how it is driven by meta jokes and parody of Chinese web novel tropes, which would largely be missed by international audiences. Western audiences at the time were getting translations of Xianxia and Xuanhuan novels and manhwa through fan translation, but Spirit Mountain was not a popular title for English readers, or Japanese readers for that matter. One thing that you can take from that is that this project, and others like it, was that they were first and foremost made for Chinese audiences. Any international audience was a second thought. They were simply trying to tap into the market for Japanese animation in China using their own IPs. I like the novel of Spirit Mountain. Its manhwa adaptation is also quite a good read. The animated series, on the other hand, is nothing to write home about. The animation is plain, which was not too surprising judging from the studio and the staff working on it. The show itself was not bad, surprisingly so, even if it did not get a lot of popularity. Looking back, most Sino-Japanese productions have bad reputations for the most part, because most seem to have had messy productions, which meant animation was bad and pacing was terrible. But Spirit Mountain actually stands out as a decent series in the midst of them all, which was quite surprising for me, even though it still had the same issues as other co-productions. Next we have Frankenstein's Family. This series was an interesting one because, unlike Spirit Mountain, it came a bit later and it involved many parts. For instance, the original work is a manhwa from Taiwan, but in charge of the animation production was Big Fire Bird, but it involved key staff members from Japan, and it aired in Japan at the same time as it was released in China. It came only 2 years after Spirit Mountain, but instead of the Japanese basically handling most of the animation, the industry in China had developed to a level where it could work in 2D animation alongside their Japanese peers. This series was not necessarily unpopular, but it did not gather a lot of attention, even though, like Spirit Mountain, it was released in Crunchyroll, so it had English subs. Hence, even though it was a Sino-Japanese production, if one did not care about the background stuff, then it would perhaps be seen just like any other anime, and it looked reasonably good as well. It did, however, have a 15-minute runtime, with live action sections with the voice actors from Japan filling the remaining minutes to make up 24 minutes. It seems that the shorter duration of the actual series threw off some people that did not enjoy the live action bits. On the other hand, I actually enjoyed both bits equally actually, and this is actually the co-production that I actually enjoyed the most out of pretty much all of them. Overall, the series was enjoyable for me. Not only was the animation for the most part good, but it managed to blend really well with the background sounds to give a really soothing atmosphere. Frankenstein Family has a tragic setting that involves human experimentation, but it's all about the interaction between the family and the difficulty faced by them together as they try to get used to human society again. It stood out to me as a really good yashikei, but sadly one that did not become too highly popular. Its lack of popularity in Japan and in China as well directly affected a part of the series that caused a lot of raw ratings in sites like MyAnimeList, and that is the ending. In Japan, the last 2 episodes, which were the ones shown by Crunchyroll, were cut and shown together, hence it left out bits that made it a bit peculiar for viewers, and many people commenting on the series saw this as a big minus point for it. Looking back, Frankenstein Family is definitely the best Sino-Japanese production in my opinion, but like most of them, it was not successful, but to me, it's a good series. Next we have Blood Divorce. Blood Divorce was one of the most popular Sino-Japanese productions in the English-speaking world. The series is based on a manhwa and it's also called in English Space Time Traveler, which is actually the correct translation of the Chinese title. It aired back in 2016, when co-productions were a lot more prevalent. In Blood Divorce's case, it was animated by creators in Park and Namu, 2 Japanese studios, and most of the key staff were Japanese, apart from the director Chen Ye. Obviously, it's worth keeping in mind that a lot of the more laborious animation work is actually done outside of Japan for most anime, and also for most Donghua, so it's never fully Japanese or Chinese. Like many co-productions at the time, they were licensed by Crunchyroll or other licensors and released alongside other anime series with English subs. The fact this was an adaptation of a Chinese webcomic was not too commented on. Story-wise, Blood Divorce revolves around vampires, sci-fi and strange monsters, and on top of all that, a death survival-esque setting. Hodgepodge is probably not a bad word to describe it. It's not necessarily a complete mess, but it does make the story feel a bit convoluted because there are so many elements. In order to take the reader's eye away from the setting, it focuses on character building and action, and we follow them as they unveil the mysteries of the messy world the author created for them. It can be a fun series, but a key problem it faced was the pacing and animation quality, like all other co-productions. The bad animation was not a surprise. The two studios working on it and the fact neither had a long or particularly impressive portfolio was a telling sign. Adding to those signs was the staff working on it, who were equally inexperienced. In comparison to another co-production like Spirit Mountain, the fact it was a more action-driven story did mean it needed better animation to succeed. So the low animation quality actually was quite a problem. These problems drag down the series, and it is a really lowly rated series in most anime community sites, and it has been largely forgotten, like many other co-productions. But I feel it might be worth a shot if you like the sound of it, and that's the case for all of these co-productions. So that was the video, guys. Do you guys have any series that is quite poorly rated but that you actually really enjoy? Do you think these series really sucked that much? Leave a comment down below with your opinions. Of course, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. Catch you guys later.